Who was the real 007? Depending on who you ask, the answer you're likely to get will be different. But what if you're wrong? Hello and welcome to yet another exciting video. In this episode, we will review the life story of Dusko Popov, the playboy who inspired the James Bond character. British agent. For many who love action movies and Hollywood blockbusters, James Bond will most likely be among their top 3 favorite characters. Many actors have played the character, and we all have our favorites. For some, it's Sean Connery, the first Bond. Others will point to Pierce Brosnan as their favorite, while some will turn to Daniel Craig as their best James Bond character. But while all these men played the larger-than-life character on screen, it will interest you to know that Ian Fleming's James Bond was tailored after the life of a famous British double agent, Dusko Popov. Popov was a Serbian spy who also spied for Britain's MI5 and MI6. He also spied for the Germans and the FBI. Despite all his multiple allegiances, he also loved the high life and was notoriously known for his playboy lifestyle during World War II. Admiral John Godfrey was Ian Fleming's boss at Naval Intelligence during the war, and he admitted that Fleming's work on James Bond was by far the most interesting and amusing work ever produced covering the war years. But who was Dusko Popov? Dusko Popov, the spy. Dusko Popov lived a fascinating life which influenced his character from an early age. As a young man, Popov was expelled from prep school. Years later, he was banished from Germany for making uncomplimentary statements about Hitler's Third Reich government. Eventually, when the Second World War began, he enlisted and became a spy, a trade he went on to practice to the best of his abilities. At some point, Popov was said to have been spying for 3 different agencies in different countries: the German Abwehr, Britain's MI5 and MI6, as well as the US's FBI. Along the line, he developed a taste for the high life and was known to date the most beautiful women of his time. How it all began. On August 10, 1941, the German Abwehr sent Popov to the US to build an active spy network so as to gather information about the country's defense installation of Pearl Harbor. However, the Germans did not know that Popov had already enlisted with the British and was already working as a double agent. Once he arrived in New York, rather than get to work secretly, he alerted the FBI and told them that the Germans wanted the defense installation of the harbor for the Japanese. He also warned that an attack was close at hand. Unfortunately for the US, then-director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, ignored the warning. This FBI boss did not trust him and so therefore blew his cover. On the other side of the Atlantic, MI5 wanted Popov as a tool to deceive the Germans about the D-Day invasion. So they convinced him that if he returned to the Abwehr Secret Service building in Lisbon, he would be tortured and executed. And that was how the young Serbian began the life of a double agent. A useful asset. At the time, many governments placed a premium on spies and were willing to pay a king's price for talented spies. The British recruited him because they felt he was intuitive, instinctive, and ruthless. They recruited him to steal money for MI5 as part of a laundering scheme. As for the Germans, they were also mesmerized by the man and wanted him in their network. In August of 1941, Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, while serving as a naval intelligence officer, witnessed firsthand how cunning and quick-witted Dusko Popov could be. Fleming was assigned the tasks of protecting a British financial investment of $40,000, and in the process witnessed how Popov won an outrageous bet at a casino called Estoril in Portugal. The experience influenced Fleming to create some casino scenes in his Bond stories. This was the same month the Germans contracted him to travel to the US to build a spy network. As if by coincidence, the British had loaned him to the FBI because J. Edgar Hoover felt he would be a useful asset in weeding out German spies. However, rather than do what the Germans asked, he came with proof to show the Americans what the Germans were planning by using the British attack of Tarantino as inspiration. Unfortunately, Hoover, who disliked Popov's flamboyant lifestyle, ignored the warning 4 months before the Japanese struck. The FBI director did not tell his staff or President Franklin Roosevelt what he had heard. It was only long after the war, in 1972, that British intelligence declassified the document. Based on the accounts of those who knew him, Dusko Popov was broken when the Japanese eventually attacked Pearl Harbor, like he had predicted. And to make matters worse, his cover was already blown by New York columnist Walter Winchell, who was a close friend of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Winchell reported that Popov was in a romantic relationship with actress Simone Simon, who was one of the stars of the legendary flick Cat People. That an agent who was supposed to be an undercover figure appeared on the pages of mainstream newspapers was untenable, and this development affected his career. Fortunately for him, he redeemed himself when he successfully convinced the Nazis that the Allies were going to execute a D-Day invasion led by General Patton at Dover. His trick caused the Germans to leave their position at Normandy exposed, when it eventually took place on June 6, 1944. His diversion was made even more successful by the terrible weather that occurred a day before the event. Amidst the risk of torture and certain death, he was able to deceive the Nazis to make a fatal mistake, and his contribution to the success of the Allies was impactful. His courageous act inspired Ian Fleming to develop James Bond. The life of Dusko Popov. This video would be incomplete without reliving the life of one of the most famous spies of the Second World War. So here is a quick rundown about MI5's greatest spy. He was born rich. One thing many may not know is that Dusko was born into a wealthy aristocratic Serbian family. His family spent most of their time in the seaside city of Dubrovnik. Many believe that Dusko developed his playboy lifestyle in this picturesque town. His education took him to Freiburg, where he struck a relationship with another student called Johan Jebsen. The two were close and were notorious with the ladies of Freiburg at the time. However, Dusko pushed his luck too far and crossed paths with the law, which led to his expulsion from Germany for his criticism of the Nazi Party. He was spending his time in Dubrovnik when he received a letter from Jebsen to go to Belgrade. He enlisted with the Abwehr. On getting to Belgrade, he found out that his friend, Jebsen, had joined the Abwehr and persuaded Popov to do the same. He was not immediately convinced, but his adventurous spirit got the better of him, and he decided to do as his friend had asked, but with a twist. The young upstart went to the British embassy and offered his services to the British. The British were happy with his decision to spy for them, and they were right because he eventually became their most valuable asset. Although he was very effective and provided the British with valuable intel, he was also known to party hard and was the toast of the parties he attended. Mr. Tricycle. Popov was known to be a ladies' man and earned the moniker Mr. Tricycle for his love of threesomes with two women at once. This made his image even more pronounced, and his nickname never left him. An avid gambler. Popov was also an avid gambler and was known to gamble all his money away sometimes. However, he did enjoy big wins too. On one occasion, he was said to have won so much that he had about $1.4 million lying idle on a casino table while sitting close by enjoying his drink. The episode that caught Fleming by surprise and influenced his Bond character was when Popov won a big bet against a Lithuanian, and the winning prize was worth millions. His life was best described in 3 words: work, women, and gambling. After the war. After the war had ended with victory for the Allies, Dusko Popov transitioned to civilian life by relocating to the south of France, where the weather was pleasant. He married soon after, but as expected, the marriage did not last, but ended in divorce. He did settle down again, but this time with a 19-year-old Swedish girl who eventually had 3 children with him. Unfortunately, the drinking, smoking, and partying caught up with him, and he died at the age of 69 in 1981. He should have lived for much longer, but his life ended sooner than he must have expected. But on a bright note, he led an eventful life that influenced the fortune of the greatest war that was ever fought in the history of the world. Up to now, there have been several James Bond characters that have thrilled fans at the box office. But imagine how it would have been to watch Dusko Popov in real life. It would have been epic, and Ian Fleming would not have been able to develop the Bond character without getting inspiration from him. He died many decades ago, but his life and story still lives on in every Bond character and movie released. Let's just hope that we never witness another world war and the birth of another Popov. The world is already chaotic as it is. Let's just leave it at that.